I have been dead for several days. Jonathan still doesn't know. He still hasn't come home, until his friend, shocked, stumbled upon a piece of news. Jonathan, there's been a murder in your neighborhood. Jonathan didn't even look up. His friend suddenly dropped his phone to the ground. The victim is Clara. The pen Jonathan was using to review documents instantly fell to the floor. Chapter 1. I am dead. I floated in the air, watching my body lying in a pool of blood. In the bedroom, the murderer was still ransacking the safe, grabbing valuable items. With a thud, a gust of wind blew into the room, and the culprit left. The spacious flat was in complete disarray. These were the marks from my struggle with the killer before I died. I gazed emptily around me. I had no idea when anyone would discover my body. Jonathan and I had argued. He hadn't returned for days. He said, "Clara, if you won't let Nova work at the company, then I see no reason to come back. If you change your mind, call me. Night fell again. No calls came, and no one returned. I tried to float outside, and succeeded. I drifted to the Hahn Company building. The lights in Jonathan Hahn's office were still on. The door suddenly knocked. A young woman walked in. It was Nova. "Jonathan, aren't you off work yet?" It was already 8 o'clock, and she still hadn't left. Besides, her makeup was still flawless. Jonathan looked up but furrowed his brows lightly. "I still have some work to finish. You should head home. The Hahn family won't crumble. You don't need to wear yourself out like this." His words carried a slight rebuke, but they could also be read as concern. Nova smiled faintly, then moved to the desk to straighten the scattered documents. "Let me help you tidy up before you leave." Jonathan said nothing, tacitly consenting, but my heart tightened for a moment. Jonathan didn't really like others touching his things, but she was Nova, Jonathan's first love. Everyone said that if Nova hadn't suddenly left Jonathan to go abroad back then, I'd never have had a chance. Nova, who had reached the door, suddenly turned back. Her face twisted slightly. "Is there anything else? The recent string of thefts and stalking has caused such a stir." "Jonathan, could you take me home?" Nova said, clenching her palms. I looked at Jonathan. Jonathan didn't hesitate and stood up. "All right, I'll take you home." The moment he stood up, a large part of my heart went empty. Many years had passed, but Jonathan still had Nova in his heart. No, perhaps not still. She was the only one in his heart. Even though I married him, was Jonathan's rightful wife. He never truly compromised for me. Tenderness was even rarer. Marrying me felt more like an act of defiance against Nova. Chapter 2. Along the way, Nova sat in the passenger seat, asking several questions. Jonathan answered patiently. The carriage was silent for a moment, and Nova looked at Jonathan again, probing cautiously. "Jonathan, I heard you haven't been home for days. Are you living at the company?" I studied Jonathan's expression carefully. He seemed very restless, the veins on the back of his hand bulging. Then he let out an ambiguous Was he thinking of me? Just mentioning my name irritates him? During our marriage, he never once showed me a kind face. Nova lowered her head, gently curling the corner of her lips. She was happy. When the car arrived downstairs at the residential complex, Nova did turn back. "Jonathan, go upstairs and have a sip of water." Jonathan's phone suddenly rang. It was the secretary calling. He frowned after answering. "I have to return to the company. You go upstairs first." After Nova went upstairs, Jonathan restarted the car and rushed back to the company. Chapter 3. The elevator doors opened, and the assistant was already waiting for Jonathan. "The meeting starts in 3 minutes?" The assistant nodded. Jonathan walked past, then turned back. "Is there anything else?" "The vice president hasn't been to the company for several days. There are a few documents, and the process is stuck with her." The vice president refers to me. The company once hit rock bottom. At that time, I used every means to help Jonathan. Jonathan later gave me the title of vice president at the company. Jonathan Hahn frowned sharply. "President Hahn, my wife and I have argued too, but I was always the one to give in. A little coaxing always made things right. The vice president is even easier to please. If you bring back some flowers, the vice president will calm down immediately." The assistant finished, still holding on to hope. Jonathan's face remained cold, without the slightest sign of softening. Just do your part properly. What about the files stuck with the vice president? Jonathan suddenly kicked the door hard and snapped. Files? Bring those files to me. So what if it's her? The company can't run without her? The assistant trembled in fear and didn't dare make a sound again. Jonathan walked into the office, loosened his tie, and tossed it aside, hands on his hips. He calmed himself for a few moments before sitting in front of the screen and opening the overseas video conference. Chapter 4. After the meeting, Jonathan once again slept at the company. Behind his office, there was a fully equipped bedroom. In the afternoon, the assistant knocked and came in. Dorian just called, saying that on his last business trip, he brought 2 boxes of crisp candy. He's been busy lately and asked you to pick them up. Crisp candy is Han Mama's favorite, and all of Jonathan Han's friends know that. I'll go pick it up. Jonathan paused with the pen in hand. No need. I'll go myself. I'm going to the old residence tonight anyway. The assistant nodded, then added without waiting for a reply. Perfect. You can invite Madam. The old Madam has always been fond of Madam. Jonathan lifted his deep eyes, and the assistant immediately fell silent. Wasn't last night's warning enough? Martin, are you tired of being an assistant? Why not come work as my butler? Mind my private life? President Han. I spoke out of turn. I won't dare again. The assistant buried his head deeply. I looked at Assistant Martin a year ago, when his wife suffered a massive hemorrhage during pregnancy. I was the one who rushed her to the hospital. It was because of that he has always wanted to help me. Chapter 5. After the afternoon meeting, Jonathan drove to the City Public Security Bureau. Everyone at the police bureau knows him. Jonathan's qualifications surpass even Dorian's. If he had graduated from the police academy and hadn't been recalled by the Han family, he would surely still be in the police force, standing shoulder to shoulder with Dorian. During their internship, Jonathan and Dorian worked together to crack a border drug trafficking case. The old team leader kept urging Jonathan to stay in the police force. Dorian rushed out. Jonathan. As if just coming out of the interrogation room, Dorian's eyes were rimmed with red veins. Come, sit in my office for a while. Been busy lately? Dorian nodded. There's been a string of thefts and murders in the city. You heard about it, right? Last night, we set a citywide trap and finally caught the culprit. Good grief. So he used to be a mercenary. His build is even stronger than ours. And when caught, he wouldn't utter a single word. Used to be a mercenary? Jonathan frowned. Suddenly, a commotion broke out in the hall. Behave yourself. A very large man was ushered out of the interrogation room. Jonathan and Dorian stepped aside. I was already stunned. This was the villain who killed me. He slightly raised his head, revealing a fierce, bloodthirsty gaze. That night, I fought back desperately, but he quickly pinned me from behind within moments. A fishing line coiled around my neck, tightening, pulling hard. I clenched my fists and chipped at the wall, but couldn't send out any signal for help. Jonathan locked eyes. His temple twitched suddenly. Is it him? Dorian nodded. It's this guy. He's handled cases for years, and I've never seen anyone more brutal. Not just theft, but murder. When the killer met Jonathan's gaze, the once sinister expression slightly darkened. What was that look? I had a rough guess. In my bedroom, there hangs the wedding photo of Jonathan and me. He glanced at it during the burglary. That means he recognized Jonathan. Jonathan. What's wrong? Dorian asked, then motioned to the officers holding the suspect to take him away. He's killed people? How many? According to current reports, he has burglarized 2 places and killed 2 people. Jonathan suddenly let out a sigh of relief. We're afraid there may be more victims, but we haven't received any reports yet. We worry that someone living alone might have been killed days ago without anyone knowing. Jonathan's nerves, recently relaxed, suddenly tensed again. Dorian noticed Jonathan was off. In Dorian's eyes, Jonathan had always been sure of victory. I heard from Pablo that you and Clara have been on cold terms lately. You haven't gone back for quite a few days? Pablo was also a mutual friend of theirs. Jonathan felt irritated and did not answer. Jonathan, when Nova left you behind to go abroad, you were surrounded by enemies. At your hardest moments, she didn't even call. Back then, all of us brothers had our own matters. Only Clara stayed by your side without asking for anything. Hurting Clara for Nova really isn't worth it. Jonathan lowered his eyes, his expression heavy. The two were about to go upstairs. Jonathan's phone rang. He pulled it out. It was the property management. Usually, property management only contacts me. They rarely reach out to Jonathan. They should have called me before this call. Hello, Mr. Han. Are you home? The department store clerk delivered the cleaned watch but has been unable to reach Mrs. Han by phone. Jonathan's temple suddenly twitched faintly. Still can't get through? Yes. We're right at your door. Knocking. But no one is answering. Strange. Now that you mention it. It's been quite some time since I've seen you and Madam go out. Jonathan's heartbeat suddenly quickened. He hasn't been home lately. Property management hadn't seen him around. But Clara wasn't at work and should be at home. How could they not have seen her? Everyday household items, at the latest. She would restock them once every 3 days. Are you sure you haven't seen Clara leave for over a week? No, Mr. Han. I floated in the air, watching Jonathan from such close range. Suddenly, he seemed unsteady on his feet. From over there, property management suddenly let out a startled cry. Huh, your front door looks damaged at one corner? Isn't this the best security door? Weighing 100 kilograms? How is the edge curled up like that? I remembered this detail. At the time, someone knocked, saying they had a delivery. I thought it was Jonathan's watch, freshly cleaned, so I opened the door to receive it. But as soon as I did, the man in the courier uniform raised his hand and sprayed some white mist at me, then pressed a metal rod against the door, trying to force his way inside. He was too strong. I couldn't close the door against him, and my mouth went numb. I couldn't make a sound. I couldn't resist the door, so I immediately turned to grab my phone. The moment my hand touched the phone, he had already caught up, swinging a heavy stick at the back of my head. The phone I had just gripped slipped from my hand and fell to the ground. I clearly saw Jonathan's hand holding the phone trembling. Cold sweat broke out on his forehead as well. What did you say? The door is broken? These past days, without taking any leave, I hadn't gone to work before. No matter how angry I was, I would never go more than 3 days without calling him first. I'd never acted so recklessly before. Jonathan Han seemed to finally realize that something was wrong. Yes, Mr. Han, are you at the company? Please come back quickly. I have a bad feeling about this. Jonathan's eyes suddenly turned bloodshot, and the veins on his neck bulged. What's going on? Jonathan? Dorian looked at Jonathan, who seemed so off, and felt a cold sweat run down his back. Jonathan lowered his hand, but before he could say anything, he dashed out of the police station. What exactly was said on the phone? Sutong, you still haven't taken it. Dorian called after him. I'm not taking it anymore. Jonathan got into the car, started the engine, and covered his face with his hand. Jonathan, tell me, what exactly happened? Dorian, something might have happened at my house. Jonathan lowered his hand. Something happened? Is it about money? Or is it about Clara? There are two aspects, one about money, the other about a life. Jonathan did not dare to answer anymore. He stepped on the accelerator, drove out of the parking lot, and sped toward the Swan Mansion. I hovered in the air, watching the car speeding away into the distance. I felt lost. Jonathan finally had to learn of my death. He looked very nervous, frightened. But I'm already dead. My life has stopped forever, never to come back. Chapter 6, a 1-hour drive. Yet Jonathan rushed back in just 20 minutes. Sir, property management was already waiting at the entrance to the community. Jonathan didn't stop to park. He dropped the keys and dashed upstairs. Property management followed right behind. I just asked 2 neighbors next door. They said they hadn't seen the lady leave recently either. In the elevator, Jonathan clenched his wrist tightly, veins bulging on the back of his hand. The elevator doors opened. He rushed to the doorway in a few steps. But just as he was about to place his fingerprint, he stepped back. It was as if I had lost all courage. He hadn't been sleeping well these days, at least last night. After his meeting, it was already 3 in the morning. At this moment, his entire face was ashen, shockingly pale. A faint stubble had begun to appear on his chin. Mr. Han? Jonathan Hahn suddenly pulled his hand back and wiped his face forcefully. In all these years, I had never seen him react like this, as if his nervousness had reached an unbearable peak. Seeing his state, property management, though anxious, tightly held back their worry. Right at the property management, not knowing when Jonathan would open the door, Jonathan let go, tilted his head back, gasping heavily, then pressed his trembling fingers against the door panel. He didn't look at the fingerprints but stared straight at the door panel. The heavy door slowly opened on its own, revealing the scene inside the room. A breeze swept in from the balcony, carrying a sharp scent of blood that drifted toward the doorway, accompanied by screams from the property management. I lay there on the cold floor, surrounded by dried bloodstains. Jonathan seemed about to collapse but braced himself on the doorframe for a moment. In an instant, he rushed back into the room and fell to his knees beside my corpse. Clara. Clara. He moved my body, but it was stiff beyond all stiffness. I saw his tears fall, large drops hitting my pale face. One drop, then another. How could this happen? Was there a murder? I'm calling the police. Jonathan struggled to lift me, holding me tightly in his arms. Dorian rushed in. The terrified property management staff immediately dropped their phone and grabbed the black uniformed Dorian. Why, you're a police officer? There's been a murder in our neighborhood. Dorian watched in shock as I, already lifeless and pale, lay in Jonathan's arms, and he staggered back several steps. Jonathan held me tightly, repeatedly calling my name. Clara. Clara. He seemed desperate to wake me with his voice, but I, dead for several days now, could no longer respond. Jonathan seemed to have lost his mind. Only after a full 5 minutes did Dorian react. Struggling to move forward, he raised his hand to gently pat Jonathan on the shoulder, the sound trembling as well. Jonathan, don't touch her. This is the crime scene. It's crucial to the case. He glanced at me but still couldn't bear it, turning his head away, his eyes bloodshot. But Jonathan completely ignored his words, holding my body even tighter, staring at the bloodstains on my neck, his crimson eyes trembling. Chapter 7. Later, the police force arrived. Jonathan refused to let go of me. Dorian had no choice but to support himself and led everyone to search the room for traces left by the murderer. The fishing line fallen on the ground was carefully placed into a clear bag. They sprayed fluorescent agent again, carefully collecting footprints on the ground and fingerprints from the safe. Only the forensic doctor stood aside, unable to pull Jonathan away or examine my body. It wasn't until the sun set that Jonathan, tense all over, finally calmed down a little and released his grip. The police managed to carry me out, placed me on a stretcher, and took me to the forensic department for examination. When the forensic doctor tried to examine my body, Jonathan almost immediately punched him. Her cause of death is so obvious. Can't you see? Why do you even need an autopsy? What kind of useless forensic doctor are you? The forensic doctor was struck so hard that blood spurted from his nose. Jonathan like an enraged tiger. The young forensic doctor dared not utter a single word. Jonathan Hahn suddenly. He rolled up a quilt, held me in his arms, and took me into the car, instructing the driver to return to the Hahn family old residence. He held me, standing alone and cold at the entrance of the Hahn family home. Madame Hahn, supported by Grandma, was utterly terrified. Jonathan, please restrain your grief. Clara must be laid to rest. We have already set up the spirit hall. Put her in the coffin. Let her rest in peace. Early dawn. In the spirit hall. Jonathan held me, kneeling there, refusing to let me into the cold coffin. A man seldom sheds tears lightly, but that night, with his head bowed, he kept crying, as if he was trying to shed all the tears of his life. No one dared to approach him. His somber, grief-stricken face was enough to scare anyone back 3 meters. Chapter 8. I am dead, never to come back. Jonathan found me the day after I died. I lay in the cold coffin, surrounded by pure white chrysanthemums. I lay quietly, sleeping amidst a sea of flowers. Many people came to pay their respects, mostly those from the mall, hoping to say a few words to Jonathan. But Jonathan stood by the coffin, his face ghostly pale and frightening. No one dared to approach him. After offering their condolences, they left. Suddenly, I floated in the air and saw Nova emerge from the crowd. She too wore black flowers on her arm. Crossing the threshold, she stared directly at Jonathan. After paying her respects to my coffin, she walked toward Jonathan. Jonathan, my condolences. I looked at Jonathan, who held the black wreath but didn't lift his head. Jonathan. Nova stepped forward, gently reaching for his wrist. Just as she was about to grasp it, he suddenly pulled away and said only one thing. Martin, see the guests out for me. Assistant Martin immediately came over. Nova, please go back for now. Nova had no choice but to restrain herself and followed Assistant Martin away. But on the way out, she looked back with reluctance several times. By evening, the crowd gradually thinned. The stooped grandma came to invite Jonathan to eat something but found no one at the spirit hall. Only after circling around did she find Jonathan with swollen, red eyes, slumped against the coffin, unshaven. Not a trace remained of the elegant young master image that everyone described. Han, Grandma approached, slowly crouched down, and gently comforted him. Young master, go eat something. You can't let your health fail. Jonathan only came back to himself after a long moment, his murky, deep red gaze passing through Grandma's silver hair. Grandma, Clara is dead. She will never come back. How could she have died? When we were kids, I used to be annoyed by her. She always ran here, clinging to me. I was so fed up with her, yet she always looked up to me with admiration. When I played basketball, she would go buy water for me. When I did my homework, she wanted to do hers too, coming to my house to write. Even when I applied to the police academy, she wanted to apply as well. You don't know how much she annoyed me, but despite how much I annoyed her, during my toughest times, she completely abandoned her own affairs to stay by my side. At that time, I didn't even know if I could carry the Han family name forward, but she was always full of confidence, saying I would definitely succeed. Along the way, I annoyed her. She chased after me, and in the end, we really got together and got married. But I wasn't kind to her, not gentle, and never gave her any gifts. And I rarely ever compromised for her. Maybe even heaven couldn't bear it anymore. It just suddenly took her away, leaving me no time to realize that beneath our quarrels and noisy life, she had already been etched deep into my bones. But it was too late. She just left like that. I'm an idiot. Why did I have to have cold wars with her over irrelevant people? Why did I have to live at the company? It was me. I killed her. Jonathan suddenly clenched his fists and pounded them furiously against the marble floor. Each punch left a bloody mark. The one to blame is me. I'm the damn fool. Grandma was startled and hurriedly grabbed him. Young master, please don't behave this way. We all know the young madam was a good woman, and we all cared for her. You two grew up inseparable. We're all heartbroken over the young madam's passing. The old madam has already fainted from grief, but the Han family still needs you. You must pull yourself together. You mustn't give in to despair, Grandma said with deep concern. Jonathan lay back beside the coffin, tears tracing the corner of his mouth, then suddenly let out a bitter laugh. Grandma, do you know what Clara's last message on her phone was? Grandma, tears brimming, shook her head in a daze. It was. Jonathan's throat seemed to tighten, stuck. He couldn't bring himself to say it. He couldn't bear it, how much he owed this family in his lifetime. His throat rolled painfully as his eyes turned even redder. It was. I'm sorry, little one. Mom didn't protect you 3 years ago, but today I'm here with you. After speaking, Jonathan covered his bloodied, mangled hands over his face, his body shaking uncontrollably. 3 years ago, she had our first child. She was incredibly happy. But I took a call and went to England. When I returned, our child was gone too, hit by someone sent by the Wong family. What? Grandma's aged eyes widened, trembling. You and the young madam had a child? How did the old residents not know? That night, Jonathan confided only in his grandma, who had cared for him since childhood. We were all so busy back then. We only discovered the pregnancy at 2 months. She was so happy. Every time I recall her holding the ultrasound report with that smile, my heart aches and fills with fear. How could I be such a bastard? Grandma's voice trembled uncontrollably. Did you go to England because of Nova? Jonathan did not dare to answer. At Clara's spirit hall, he had no face to respond. But he also knew that Clara knew exactly why he went to England. Only Nova remains in England. He abandoned his affairs at home because of a call for help from Nova and rushed to the UK. On the way to the bid, the Wong family, intent on winning the project, sent someone to ram Clara's car. Although over the years, he had crushed the Wong family into the ground, they could never rise again in 3 lifetimes. But that child, in that car accident, also turned into a pool of blood. The doctor told him that when Clara was rushed into the emergency room, she begged the doctor to save her child at all costs, save the baby, even if it meant losing her. But the child had already turned into a pool of blood long ago. There was no way to save it. Grandma, after hearing that, was left speechless. Leaning on the coffin, she stood up, wiped her eyes, and walked away slowly. Chapter 9. The next day, the police investigation results were finally out. I was killed by the criminal caught 2 days ago. Billy was very careful, but during the struggle, I managed to scratch his skin. The forensic doctor confirmed that the skin tissue left on my hand genetically matched the skin tissue on Billy. Dorian interrogated Billy relentlessly for 2 days and 2 nights. In the end, Billy broke down and confessed to all his crimes, including the intrusion Swan Mansion, my murder, and the theft. After the funeral ended, everyone departed. Jonathan sat by my tombstone for a long while. The weather was clear. He leaned against my tombstone and slowly closed his eyes, as if falling asleep. Only asleep, yet tears welled at the corners of his eyes. Martin was deeply moved, turned away, and went to wait by the car at the foot of the mountain. As the sun neared the horizon, Jonathan stood, picked some nearby wildflowers, arranged a small bouquet, and placed it before my tombstone. Then he knelt and kissed the cold stone. Clara, wait for me. I stood frozen in midair. I couldn't understand his actions. He got up and went down the mountain. Chapter 10. Police Station. Dorian pushed the files to Jonathan. The culprit is named Billy, who spent 2 years as a mercenary in Myanmar. No wonder. Clara was no match for him. Jonathan rubbed his face harshly and opened the dossier. I carefully read the text above. I shivered and stumbled back a few steps. It turns out the murderer was by the roadside, spying on Jonathan and me arguing. He saw Jonathan slam the car door and leave me behind. The murderer followed me all the way, tears streaming down my face, right to the doorstep. That day, at the high school reunion, Nova suddenly appeared, her black silky hair flowing, her eyes mesmerizing. Hello everyone, I'm back. The room fell silent. I almost froze. Nova, gone for 6 years, had returned. She quietly looked at Jonathan as if she had 1,000 words to tell him. I nervously glanced at Jonathan. He was clearly surprised, but the deepening look in his eyes held a trace of joy. After the initial shock, everyone welcomed her warmly. She had been the class belle in high school, talented in arts and entertainment. Though she occasionally lost her temper, many still tolerated her. I instinctively gripped Jonathan's hand, but a profound sense of insecurity already enveloped me. Nova poured the wine herself, toasted several people, and finally approached Jonathan with a soft voice. Jonathan, long time no see. Jonathan remained motionless for a long time, seemingly intent on making her uncomfortable, his dark eyes sharp and piercing. But she did not retreat. She waited quietly for him. 1 minute, 2 minutes, enduring the strange looks cast upon her from around. My heart raced uncontrollably, pounding wildly, each beat a sharp sting. When I lifted the wine glass, ready to meet hers, in my role as Madame Jonathan, standing in for Jonathan, the hand I held, despite my firm grip, resolutely pulled away, lifted the glass, and drank deeply in silence. Partway through, someone asked Nova if she was still going abroad and what her next plans were. She shook her head. Just staying in the country. Next, I plan to find a job and live a steady life. After saying this, she asked hopefully, does anyone have any suitable job recommendations? As soon as she said that, almost everyone looked to Jonathan. Everyone knew he was the boss of the Han Company, so arranging a job was never a problem. Someone said, the Han Company should have suitable jobs. Nova, you could try submitting your resume. Yeah, we're all workers. Only Jonathan is the boss. A faint glimmer of hope appeared in Nova's eyes. Is that possible? Jonathan, can I work at your company? I'm good at marketing. The air fell silent. I clenched my palm, trying to speak softly. Sorry, Nova. The marketing department isn't lacking. We're just one person short. You can come tomorrow, but the marketing department's work isn't easy. Are you sure you can handle it? Jonathan suddenly interrupted me. I felt an invisible, heavy slap land on my face, meeting Jonathan's gaze. My chest felt weighed down like lead, but he simply turned his face away, avoiding my eyes, radiating a biting coldness. Nova immediately smiled. Thank you, Jonathan. I will definitely take this job seriously. After the reunion ended, I could no longer hold back the bitterness inside me. No, I don't agree with her coming to work at the company. Absolutely not. Jonathan, you've gone too far. What do you take me for? He turned away, his face irritated and cold. It's just a job. Clara, do you have to overthink everything? I took a deep breath but clenched my teeth, refusing to relent. He kicked the car tire irritably, making the whole car shake. I still held back tears, my fists trembling in the cold wind as I stared at him. Jonathan, the company has her, not me. I took a step back. Our partner, Astra Enterprise, is recruiting marketing talent. We can recommend her to ASTRA company. He immediately fixed me with a cold stare. Astra, infamous for its graveyard shifts? Clara, you've been living in comfort these past few years. Do you no longer see others as people? I was nearly speechless. Graveyard shifts, but that's a place famous for highly educated people, with annual salaries in the millions. Who has it easy working there? The so-called luxury I enjoyed was bitter to me. During the Han crisis, I stood by him, rooted in the company, chasing business together. Months of non-stop overnight shifts had already ravaged my stomach. Later, when the company stabilized, no matter how I tried to regain my strength, my thin frame never surpassed 100 pounds. Preparing for pregnancy was difficult. My tears no longer obey control. They roll down uncontrollably. But he only felt irritability and disgust. I just remembered. There's still a file at the company that hasn't been dealt with. I'll probably spend the night there. You should go home. Jonathan pulled the car door open and got in. The black Bentley drove away, and my heart felt shattered like broken glass, bleeding and stained. This memory, replayed after my death, still aches. Billy was fired by the mercenary group, returned home, and began stealing to amass wealth. He was confident in his fighting skills, and his methods were extremely brutal. Dorian took a deep, harsh breath and lit a cigarette. Jonathan, if Clara hadn't left the police force, if she hadn't stayed with you, I believe there's a good chance she'd still be alive. After finishing the case file, Jonathan's clenched fists tightened even more. I don't want to rub salt into your wounds, but this is a life at stake. I don't understand. If you couldn't give her your whole heart, why marry her at all? You might say it was because she loved you so much that not marrying her made you feel guilty. Even if you carry this guilt for a lifetime, at least she wouldn't have died, not because of your neglect and indifference. Cough. Dorian was choked by the smoke and coughed violently. Only then did I realize his face was already pale, a network of bloodshot veins in his eyes. A man as tough as steel, broken down by consecutive sleepless nights. Jonathan pushed the dossier aside. Take me to see that bastard. What do you intend to do? Jonathan's gaze was sharp and direct. Dorian, I am the victim's husband, and I have the right to see the murderer. Dorian ignored him, grabbed a cup, and prepared to go to the meeting. You'll see him in court. Jonathan wrapped his injured hand and slammed his fist on the table. Dorian, as the victim's relative, I demand to see the murderer who killed my wife. I have that right. At the door, officers from the hall crowded in. No one didn't know that these two once shared a very close bond. Now, their tense standoff crackled with the threat of a break. Dorian still refused to agree. Jonathan pushed through the crowd without hesitation, making his way toward the interrogation room. Not just anyone could roam freely through the various rooms of the police station. The officers in the hall were frightened and hurried forward to block him. But given Jonathan's status, no one dared to stop him forcefully. Let him through, Dorian said, standing by the door. Chapter 11. In the interrogation room, Billy had not yet managed to move away. He looked up at the man who stormed in. As he raised his head, Jonathan's fist was already crashing down toward his forehead. Each punch landed near his temple. Jonathan, this is a direct attempt to kill him. Billy, he took several hard punches. Dizzy and battered. Flesh torn. But still, facing the light, he lifted his head and smiled darkly. I know who you are, the husband of the girl who died at my hands on September 5th. Jonathan, his provocation made my insides ache with a dull, painful anger. Ha ha, you don't even know. She was pretty clever. She turned and ran to grab her phone. Almost got the call through. Oh, by the way, did you see the handprint she smashed into the wall? I tightened the fishing line little by little so she couldn't breathe. In her agony, she vented by pounding the wall. So pitiful, isn't it? Right. She seemed to have trained before and was the most fiercely rebellious. If I hadn't sprayed her with anesthetic at the start, it really would have been hard to control her. Her resistance was too fierce, too tough. But so what? I used to be a soldier king. She's just a girl, and even if she knows a bit of crude defense techniques, how could she be a match for me? It's precisely because she resisted so fiercely that she caused me quite a bit of pressure. After strangling her, while she still had a faint trace of breath left, I slashed her body again and again, letting her die in the most painful way. Her eyes, they shone so brightly, looking at me so helplessly, fading away little by little. She must have been a very kind person, right? Only those with the purest hearts have eyes as clear as a spring. By the way, when you found her, wasn't she covered in blood? With so many wounds, her blood must have almost completely drained out. Billy grew more and more reckless as he spoke, his blood-stained lips parting. Ha ha, ha ha. Suddenly, Jonathan lunged forward like a beast, dragging him against the wall. He almost roared it out from his lungs. Shut up. Going after a woman? You're the worst piece of shit in the world. Go rot with my wife in the grave. Right now. You damn beast. The firmly fixed interrogation table creaked as it was dragged. Billy's head was covered in blood. His gaze began to blur. 3 officers struggled fiercely to drag the enraged Jonathan a meter away. The other officers hurriedly carried Billy, who was unconscious against the wall, away. Chapter 12. Jonathan was sentenced to 15 days in detention for deliberately assaulting a prisoner. Inside the detention center, he leaned against the wall, his eyes fixed on some point. Not a word was spoken. Dorian. Open the door. Dorian stepped in, but Jonathan showed no response. During those 15 days, Jonathan made himself even more miserable than the street beggars. Following Jonathan's gaze, Dorian looked but saw nothing. Jonathan, you may come out now. The man slumped against the wall still didn't move. Billy has been sentenced to death. His execution is scheduled for mid-next month. It's some measure of solace for Clara. Pull yourself together. Jonathan remained motionless. Auntie came to pick you up too. And Nova, she's waiting for you in the police station lobby as well. I stared blankly at Jonathan, who looked like a living corpse. During 15 days of confinement, he had scarcely changed that posture. Then suddenly, he moved. His lips parted, producing a voice that was hoarse and barely audible. Dorian, I miss Clara. I always feel she's still alive, right here beside me, but she simply won't let me see her. I was stunned. Could he feel my soul? I involuntarily glanced at myself, completely transparent, unable to speak. There was no way anyone could sense me. I dreamt of her, dreamt she smiled at me, saying she made my favorite sweet and sour pork ribs today. I dreamt she leaned in to whisper that the neighborhood cats had a litter of kittens. I dreamt I took her to the seaside. She pulled me along barefoot, running on the sand, and I dreamt so many other things. Jonathan said this, then suddenly laughed. Right now, I just want to fall asleep again, to see her once more. Dorian was somewhat moved. Jonathan, face reality, the dead cannot be brought back. That day in the office, I spoke harshly. I apologize to you. Jonathan shook his head. You are not wrong. Chapter 13. Walked out of the detention center. Jonathan then saw the old madam, who raised her cane and struck him hard. Are you trying to scare me to death? Inside there, neither eating nor drinking, you want to starve yourself to death? Jonathan supported the old madam and smiled. Mom, who lied to you? That I haven't eaten or drunk anything? Tell me. I'll definitely beat him up. You haven't eaten or drunk anything. Aren't you starving yet? Old Madam was suddenly left speechless. But seeing Jonathan's body so thin and unrecognizable still pained her. Yet, Jonathan was now willing to speak on his own and even smiled. She breathed a sigh of relief. Jonathan supported Old Madam as they walked out of the main hall. Nova, waiting nearby, seemed to pretend he didn't see anything. Only after Jonathan, supporting Old Madam, had walked well past her did her eyes turn red. Jonathan, didn't you see me? I've been waiting for you since early morning. Jonathan paused, then turned around. Nova, why have you come to pick me up? You're neither my wife nor my kin. May I ask, in what capacity are you here to pick me up? Nova's face instantly went pale, her fingertips clenching tightly. Jonathan, are you angry with me? She spoke cautiously, tears welling in her eyes. I never told you before I returned to the country because of you. Back then, Nova went abroad chasing after a male celebrity who was in a band. That male celebrity liked her very much, too, but a few years later, they began to clash, and when the conflict became irreconcilable, Nova chose to return home. Jonathan turned aside, and if I'm not mistaken, his expression instantly grew several degrees colder. Nova, first, you're no one to me, so I have no reason to be angry with you. Second, you say you came back for me? I've been married for 5 years and have a wife. You came back for me? Deliberately to destroy my family? To tear my once whole family to shreds? Nova, I have a name. From now on, when you address me, please use my full name or Mr. Han. After speaking, Jonathan did not linger any longer, opened the car door, helped the Old Madam into the car, and then got in himself. Nova felt deeply wronged but still impulsively wanted to chase after and stop him, only to be blocked by Assistant Martin. Nova, control yourself. Chapter 14. Han family's old residence. It was a beautiful day, yet the air always carried a trace of cold emptiness. Han, Old Madam and Jonathan sat facing each other on pear blossom chairs in the Chinese-style main hall. The Old Madam had much to say, but seeing her haggard and worn son, all her words at last boiled down to a single sentence. Jonathan, go wash up and get some rest. Jonathan nodded. He soaked in the water for a long time, then got up and changed into clean clothes, preparing to go out again. I told you to rest a while. Where are you going? I'm going to the cemetery to see Clara. It's been half a month since I last visited. She must be lonely. Madame Han was stunned, but ultimately she didn't stop him. Down the mountain, Jonathan bought a bouquet of roses. I looked at him with some surprise. Once, I told Jonathan that I liked roses and asked why he never bought me flowers on Valentine's Day. He always says it's too tacky. He never even buys me flowers. I complain in my heart, but I can use the card at home whenever I want. If he didn't love me, how could he be so generous to me? I'm always convincing myself. Jonathan seems to really like sitting in front of my tombstone, leaning against it, keeping my cold stone company in the sunlight. The roses attracted a few bees. He didn't move at all. The bees stung the back of his hand, leaving several welts. Assistant Martin couldn't bear to watch any longer. President Han, the bees are poisonous. Let's go. More and more bees are coming. Jonathan smiled as he watched the 3 or 4 bees on the rose. She likes the bustle. They chirp and flutter around. She saw them. She must be quite happy. I sighed. Now that I'm a spirit, I feel nothing, but I'm just a pile of bones. I think I'm actually somewhat glad. It's so lonely and cold up on this mountain. A few buzzing bees make it feel alive. Chapter 15. At night, I thought Jonathan would still go back to the old residence, but he returned to our marital home instead. I was somewhat surprised. After my accident, my body first went to the police station, then the autopsy, and afterward, Jonathan took me back to the old residence to handle the funeral arrangements. During these days, he hadn't returned to our marital home. I thought he was too afraid to return there alone. A fingerprint on the door, then it opened. The air still hung heavy with the smell of blood. I remained silent. He hadn't had anyone clean, and the house was still exactly as it had been. The sight was truly terrifying. Assistant Martin stood by the door, staring at the dried bloodstains on the floor. Feeling uneasy, Jonathan sat on the sofa with his eyes closed. You should go home. Yes, President Han. Martin sighed with relief and turned to leave but then paused. President Han. I'll contact someone to clean the room. Jonathan opened his eyes, staring at the bloodstains on the floor, but remained silent. No need. I want to keep this place as it is so I can forever remember Clara's despair and pain at that moment. And my own damnation. President Han. You? Jonathan waved, signaling Martin to leave quickly. Martin turned and left, but he still felt uneasy inside. Jonathan's condition made him very worried. This was not the way to properly move on from Clara's death and live well. But at the police station, Jonathan joked with the old madam on his own initiative. Both he and the old madam breathed a sigh of relief, thinking President Han had come to terms with it and would live well. Chapter 16. After Martin left, Jonathan took out his phone and dialed a number. I watched him with worry. The sky had turned completely dark. He still didn't turn on the light, just sat there, surrounded by the stench of blood. It was enough to scare anyone to death. Fortunately, I am a ghost. After several rings, the call was finally answered. Jonathan, what are you doing? Something so serious happened at home, and you didn't even inform me? I recognized the voice. It was eldest brother, the eldest son of the Han family. 6 years ago, the Han company was still under eldest brother's management, but the internal power struggles were intense. Many senior officials had been bought by the Wang family. When eldest brother went to another province to oversee a project, he was ambushed and attacked by thugs hired by the Wang family in the underground parking garage. Eldest brother's leg was severely slashed, and he fell into a deep coma. After being in a coma for a year, he woke up, but his legs could no longer support him. At that time, the company was almost completely parceled out by the top executives. Jonathan was forced to abandon the police career he loved, and at a critical moment, he returned to take over the Han family's company. Over the years, eldest brother has been abroad receiving treatment for his leg, undergoing nearly 20 surgeries, big and small. On that side, eldest brother was nearly enraged. Am I still your eldest brother? Clara died, and I couldn't even get back in time to attend her funeral. Jonathan lowered his head. I'm sorry, eldest brother. I deliberately kept it from you. Eldest brother gave a nearly bitter smile. What exactly do you mean? I have difficulty walking, but that doesn't mean I can't come back. I watched Clara grow up, and I saw you get married. I've said before, I really liked the sister-in-law. She married into our Han family, and I never had any conflicts with her. She died unexpectedly, and you didn't even notify me to come back. How am I supposed to be eldest brother? When I die someday, how will I have the face to see her? I recalled the details of how Jonathan arranged my funeral. I remember now. Jonathan called eldest brother, and it was eldest brother's bodyguard who answered. The bodyguard said that eldest brother had just entered the operating room and excitedly told Jonathan that, after this final surgery, there was a great chance eldest brother could stand again. Jonathan heard this and withheld the news of my death. He knew that, given eldest brother's temper, if he found out about such a major event at home, he would undoubtedly abandon the surgery immediately and have the bodyguard bring him back. But every surgery time for eldest brother was scheduled by the doctors. Moving it forward or delaying it could cause failure. I fully understand why Jonathan did not tell eldest brother about my death. Eldest brother's leg has undergone too many surgeries. He has endured torments no ordinary person could bear. If only he could truly stand again, how wonderful that would be. It was today that Jonathan learned from the bodyguards that eldest brother's postoperative recovery was going well. Only then did he stop suppressing the media, allowing reports of a death in the Han family. Eldest brother, who checks domestic news regularly every day, naturally knew as well. Faced with eldest brother's furious scolding, Jonathan seemed to shed a heavy burden and smiled faintly. Eldest brother, congratulations. You can stand again. Congratulations? What is there to congratulate? Jonathan, the Han family has lost someone. Listen, over there, an airport paging announcement. Is eldest brother already at the airport? The moment he received the news, he chose to rush back. Eldest brother's voice was filled with deep sorrow. If I could, I would rather never stand again, so that you and Clara could be well. She was a good girl and did not deserve such a tragedy. Brother, her death was caused by me. It has nothing to do with you. I must bear the responsibility. You have to stand up. Stand tall and unyielding. Jonathan stood and walked toward the bedroom. The call ended. He put down the phone, bathed in moonlight. I looked at the wedding photo on the wall where we were nestled together. He walked over, touched the person in the photo on the wall, and gave a bitter smile. I'm sorry. My wife. Chapter 17. The next day, Jonathan washed up, dressed neatly, and went to the company early. When Martin arrived at the company and saw Jonathan already working in the office, he let out a deep sigh of relief. President Hahn, you're here so early. Jonathan didn't even look up, just gave a faint Bring up all the recently piled up documents. Martin responded immediately. All right then, President Hahn. All day long, Martin quietly observed Jonathan several times, noticing that he remained expressionless and worked with seriousness. During the meeting, he listened attentively, and when the presenter misstated a number, Jonathan immediately corrected it. He was exactly the same cautious and decisive President Hahn as before. Martin was overjoyed. For a company, the greatest fear is a negligent boss. Once the boss loses focus, even the best company can swiftly fall apart. Over the years, the Hahn family has struggled to stand back up. Nothing else can be allowed to go wrong now. Because of the backlog of official business accumulated over the past half-month, Jonathan worked 3 consecutive night shifts to get the company back to its normal rhythm. What puzzled Martin was that no matter how late the overtime ran, even if there were only 2 hours left before dawn, Jonathan would still insist on returning to Swan Mansion to sleep. This left Martin somewhat puzzled. Besides, the rooms there hadn't been cleaned yet and were still stained with blood. Sleeping there, was the boss really not afraid at all? But then he thought, that was the boss's madam, the person he loved most, facing the one he loved most. How could he be afraid? From another perspective, if his wife had an accident, he certainly wouldn't be afraid. He would only be more devoted than the boss. No. How could he even imagine his wife having an accident? Martin thinks that although the boss's remorse came too late, often it is this sudden awakening that hits hardest. Like a high-proof flicker. Chapter 18. Eric has already returned to the country, but his leg hasn't fully recovered from surgery before he flew back. He is still quietly recuperating at the old residence, and the overseas medical team has also come here, ready to assist at any time. The old madam saw her eldest son return. His leg was gradually recovering, and the heavy clouds of worry finally lifted. Jonathan was very happy, yet he remained especially cautious, deeply concerned for eldest brother's safety. Eldest brother's body could no longer withstand another accident. Jonathan still hoped he would rise and return to the company. Jonathan spent some time at the old residence, keeping eldest brother and the old madam company before rising to return home. The old madam hoped Jonathan would stay at the old residence, but she also felt she couldn't force him. He can do as he pleases. My youngest son is simply too stubborn. He's clearly very smart, yet he cannot see his own feelings clearly. As an old woman, she saw it all clearly, that he had long been infatuated with Clara, but he just wouldn't admit it. His pride made him who he was. But in the end, it was also his downfall. Chapter 19. Jonathan had just reached the door when he saw Nova following him in. He looked at her. Company matters are for the company. Once work is over, I don't handle business. Nova's lowered hand trembled slightly. Jonathan, let's have a proper talk. Jonathan, didn't I correct you last time? Nova immediately wept, tears sparkling on her pale white face. Do you really have to be like this? You know I haven't forgotten you. I wish we could go back to how things were. Clara died suddenly. I was your first girlfriend and the one you loved most. Jonathan, now, isn't there every reason for us to be together again? I floated to the side, silently watching them. Jonathan stood tall, tilted his head back, and closed his eyes briefly. Do you really want to be with me again? Nova immediately spoke, her voice trembling with emotion. Really, I truly regret leaving you. No other man is as good as you. I'm willing to give everything to return to your side. Jonathan opened his eyes. He seemed deep in thought, with no response for a whole minute. I stared at him in shock. So, was he about to be with Nova? Come to think of it, I've been dead for less than a month. I smiled with a hint of sadness, but somehow, I had come to accept it. Even though after my death, he had shown profound sorrow, it made me wonder if he had long been in love with me, but that could also have been nothing more than intense guilt. All right, as long as you promise me one condition, then we'll be together. Jonathan raised his thumb, pressing it onto the fingerprint scanner. The door slid open, and he stepped inside. Nova immediately followed, excitedly saying, I promise, whatever the condition is, I'll agree to it. Just as she was about to follow and step into the hall, her feet froze. Nova saw a large pool of blood. She clung to the doorframe, trembling. How could there be so much blood in the house they lived in? It was Clara after death. Jonathan had yet to clean up the scene. Aren't you coming in? Jonathan stood with his back to Nova. Aren't you going to be with me? Jonathan, why don't you have someone clean the house? The blood smell is so strong. It's terrifying. Terrifying? That's a pity. Nova, my only condition is that you promise to live with me in this house. What? Jonathan, what are you talking about? I know you have many other houses. We can live somewhere else. Don't you understand what I'm saying? If you want to be with me, we'll go to the company together during the day and live here together at night. Are you willing? Nova, this is the last time I'm asking you. If you don't agree, then leave and never come back. Nova leaned against the doorframe, her whole body trembling. Why are you treating me like this? Jonathan turned his head back, looking at her coldly. It was as if she had been seen through, completely exposed. Suddenly, she drew in a deep breath, as if summoning all her resolve. Fine, we'll live here together, as long as we can be together. She lifted her foot, shivering all over as she stepped inside. Stand right here. Jonathan stood where I once lay, in the very pool of blood. Nova's chest heaved with heavy breaths, inching closer little by little, but cold sweat was streaming down her face. Just one last step, and she would have succeeded in getting closer. But the moment her toes touched down, she sprang back, turned, and fled out the door in panic. She clung to the doorframe, sobbing, Jonathan, you're too much. Why did you do this to me? Jonathan coldly walked over, gripped the doorframe, and prepared to close the door. Let's go, Nova. Nova slowly loosened her hand bit by bit, and Jonathan closed the door without a trace of hesitation. A door apart, yet it completely severed any hope that the two of them might be together. Nova broke down and ran away. I floated back in to see Jonathan. He had gone into the bedroom, resting on my pillow, wrapped in my favorite sky blue quilt, sound asleep. It was just that the temperature dropped at midnight, and he didn't know to get up and add another blanket. Chapter 20. Only the next day did he wake up. I only just realized that when he fell asleep last night, he was still clutching a little cartoon whistle in his palm. I was stunned. It was something I left in the nursery, for the baby who never got to come into this world. After the pregnancy was confirmed at the hospital, I was filled with joy. On the way home, we passed a toy store, and I bought this little whistle that, when blown, makes a bird call. I had wanted to buy more, but Jonathan stopped me. He said it was too early to buy now. Waiting a few more months wouldn't be too late, so I bought just this one for the time being. But from the moment we discovered the pregnancy to losing the baby, only 3 weeks had passed. It was so fast, I hadn't even gotten around to finishing her room or buying him all those toys. Jonathan put down the recorder and went to the bathroom to freshen up. 10 minutes later, he set off again for work. I stared at his mechanical back, briefly disoriented. Chapter 21. Early autumn. The streets had yellowed, leaves swirling through the air. Nova handed in her resignation and left the Han company. Eldest brother was recovering more and more each day. Jonathan invited eldest brother to return to the company. Eldest brother looked at his tired face, assuming the workload at the company was overwhelming. He nodded. I just returned to the company and worked for a month. Eldest brother was a bit puzzled since the company's business was running smoothly. With Jonathan's high efficiency, there was no way he could be overwhelmed with work. The company's complex and massive projects, once difficult to manage, have all been sorted out by Jonathan. Everything is going very smoothly now. Jonathan, you manage the company quite well. My leg is better now. But you don't need to look down on eldest brother resting. There's no need to have me start working at the company so early. In the tea room, Jonathan smiled as he poured a cup of tea for Eric. Eldest brother, can you really bear this? You stay home reading and drinking tea all day, while I'm alone at the company, working until I get dark circles under my eyes? Dark circles? Eric said, feigning surprise as he glanced at him. But on this point, Eric had no words to argue. The company was clearly running fine. Yet in Jonathan's eyes, there was always a faint bluish tint, as if he had been busy without rest for days on end. The company's smooth operation only meant that he hadn't been sleeping well. Eric Hahn felt a pang of pity for his younger brother. After a moment's thought, he reached out and gripped Jonathan's arm. Jonathan, look ahead. There's no medicine for regret in this world. Whatever's happened, none of us can undo. Jonathan pulled his hand away. Bro, I'm fine. Don't worry. He suddenly lifted his head again. Mid-next month is Mother's 60th birthday banquet. I've booked a hotel and invited guests to give her a proper celebration. That's a good thing. Eric held his teacup, staring at Jonathan rising to accompany his mother. Though he seemed momentarily stunned, he immediately spoke up. Jonathan, I heard you and Clara actually had a child. Jonathan's retreating figure froze instantly, his fists clenching tight. Yes. In less than 3 months, it was gone. Eric came over and placed his palm on his shoulder. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to bring up your pain. As your uncle, I only just found out, and I feel even more ashamed. I stood frozen in midair. The child was lost, and I was overwhelmed with grief and sorrow. But at that time, the old residents didn't know I had been pregnant. Jonathan and I silently agreed to keep it a secret from them. We all knew how much Jonathan's mother yearned for another child. It was already lost. We couldn't bear to bring more sorrow to the elders. Brother, I'm going to stay with Mother for a while. Eric still held him firmly. Jonathan, you've experienced the pain of losing a loved one. I believe you understand it very well. After saying that, Eric slowly released his grip. Jonathan said nothing and went to the East Wing to keep Jonathan's mother company. Chapter 22. A month passed. Jonathan's mother's birthday arrived. The house was filled with guests. By now, the Hahn family was unrivaled. The eldest son had returned, and the youngest son was exceptionally capable, shrewd and wise. No one in the city dares to oppose the Hahn family anymore. I floated in the air, watching Jonathan's mother's kind smile, and felt glad because of it. Then I looked at Jonathan. He chatted and laughed calmly with the guests. It's been nearly a year since I passed away. Everything seems truly normal now. Along the way, many bosses brought their daughters over to Jonathan, their intentions quite obvious. But Jonathan seemed uninterested in that. After a few polite words, he excused himself. Jonathan suddenly entered the hotel kitchen. When he came out, he was carrying a bowl of longevity noodles he had made himself. Mom, it's time to eat noodles. Jonathan's mother looked at him in stunned surprise. Jonathan smiled. Try some. Jonathan's mother picked up her chopsticks and nodded. All right. That night, Jonathan was incredibly devoted, completely shedding his usual proud and aloof demeanor. Chapter 23. 3 days later, the property management of Jonathan's residence held a lively lawn concert. I floated above the lawn, listening to the music. Suddenly, my soul scattered uncontrollably. I was stunned. Is my soul about to drift away? Suddenly, a gust of wind swept me back to the home Jonathan and I shared. The hall was dim, with no lights on. Only the bedroom held a dim yellow lamp. My soul, on the brink of dispersing, floated uncontrollably toward it. I saw the pale figure asleep on the bed, and tears unexpectedly welled up. I drifted closer. Jonathan. I tried to push him, but he didn't respond. His body grew cold inch by inch, his veins stiffening. On the floor beside him lay an empty bottle of potassium cyanide. I parted my lips. A gust of wind blew, lifting the suicide note on the desk. There were only 3 simple lines. I'm sorry, Mother. Your son has been unfilial. I've gone ahead to be with my wife. I'm sorry, Brother. The Hahn Company estate is truly being returned to you today. Wife. Don't be angry anymore. I'm here with you. Is someone in the underworld bullying you? Bullying our baby? Don't be afraid. I've come.